Steel was supposed to rule the sea. Armor, guns, speed, power. And yet, on a dark stretch of ocean, Japan's mightiest destroyer was humbled by something no admiral feared. Not a battleship, not an airstrike, not a submarine, a tiny wooden boat. No steel armor, no heavy guns. No chance on paper. But history doesn't care about paper. Because on that night, wood challenged steel and won. If you enjoy deep war stories like this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. In the early years of the Pacific War, the Imperial Japanese Navy believed it had mastered the art of naval combat. Its destroyers were fast, heavily armed, and commanded by officers trained under decades of doctrine that valued aggression, precision, and honor. Among them sailed one destroyer considered nearly untouchable, a steel predator designed to hunt enemies before they even knew it was there. To Japanese command, destroyers were not escorts. They were executioners. These ships were long, sleek, and deadly. They carried torpedoes capable of ripping apart cruisers in seconds. Their guns could shred smaller vessels before alarms finished ringing. Against anything less than a cruiser or battleship, they were kings of the sea. And against a tiny wooden boat? There wasn't even a word for that in Japanese naval planning. Small craft were dismissed as irrelevant. Fishing boats, patrol skiffs, improvised transports. They were seen as background noise. Civilian clutter on a battlefield dominated by steel and firepower. That assumption would prove fatal, because wars are not won by what you prepare for. They are decided by what you ignore. The destroyer sailed with confidence. Its crew trusted the steel around them, the doctrine behind them, and the belief that superiority meant safety. The sea was dark, but calm. The radar showed nothing worth concern. No enemy task force, no incoming aircraft. No submarines stalking below, just empty water. What the Japanese did not understand was that their enemy had adapted. Allied forces, desperate, resourceful, and brutally realistic, had learned something the Japanese had not. Power does not always come from size. Sometimes it comes from surprise, from timing, from audacity, from attacking where the enemy refuses to look. The tiny boat was not impressive. It did not inspire fear. Its hull was wood, not steel. It lacked armor. Its engine was modest. Its silhouette barely disturbed the water. But it carried men who understood one truth. A giant that does not expect a threat is already wounded. As the destroyer moved through contested waters, its crew followed routine. Lookouts scanned for aircraft. Officers listened for reports of submarines. Gun crews remained ready for large silhouettes. Cruisers, destroyers, transports. No one was watching for something so small it barely existed in doctrine. That is how myths die. The Japanese Navy had built its reputation on crushing opponents through superior force. From early victories across the Pacific, confidence had hardened into arrogance. Each success reinforced the belief that Japanese ships were untouchable unless met by equal steel. But history punishes arrogance with precision. The tiny boat closed distance silently. No radar spike, no engine roar, no warning sirens. The destroyer's guns, designed to fight other warships, were useless against something that wasn't supposed to be there. This was not a duel. It was a blind spot being exploited. When the first realization struck the Japanese crew, it was already too late to rethink assumptions. Steel does not turn quickly. Doctrine does not adapt mid-battle. And pride does not leave room for fear. Until fear arrives anyway. This was not just a clash of vessels. It was a clash of thinking. One side believed power came from size, strength, and tradition. The other believed power came from daring, timing, and the enemy's blindness. The ocean did not care which belief was older, only which one survived. And before the night ended, the Imperial Japanese Navy would learn a lesson written not in strategy books, but in burning steel and shattered confidence. The small boat moved slowly, deliberately, hugging the darkness like a living thing that understood survival. Its crew spoke in whispers, not out of fear, but discipline. They knew the destroyer ahead represented overwhelming power, yet also catastrophic overconfidence. Against steel, they could not trade blows. They could only strike once, perfectly. The Japanese destroyer cut through the water with the assurance of experience. Its engines hummed steadily, a sound of dominance. Officers on the bridge reviewed charts and expected nothing more than routine movement. There were no alarms, no flares, no orders to battle stations. Confidence ruled the deck. What the crew did not realize was that their greatest advantage had become their greatest weakness. The destroyer's speed meant nothing against an enemy that did not intend to chase. Its guns meant nothing against a target too small to justify firing. Its armor meant nothing against a strike aimed at vulnerability, not strength. The small boat closed the distance meter by meter. Every second mattered. Too early, and the destroyer would detect them. Too late, and the opportunity would vanish forever. The men aboard the boat had trained for this moment, knowing they would not get another chance. For centuries, navies believed control of the sea belonged to whoever built the largest ships. Battleships proved it, cruisers reinforced it, destroyers enforced it. But war was changing faster than doctrine could follow. The ocean had become a battlefield of shadows. The Japanese lookout finally sensed movement. Not certainty, just doubt. A ripple that felt wrong. A shadow where none should exist. He raised his binoculars, squinting into the darkness, trying to convince himself it was nothing. That hesitation was fatal. The small boat surged forward, engines pushed to their limit. The crew moved with mechanical precision. There was no shouting, no panic, just action. Weapons were released not with rage, but calculation. Impact came not as an explosion, but as shock. Steel screamed. The destroyer shuddered violently as the first hit tore into its hull. Not center mass, not armored sections, but the vulnerable heart below the waterline. The place every naval architect feared and every commander prayed would never be reached. Within seconds, alarms finally screamed to life. Orders were shouted. Searchlights snapped on, slicing through the darkness too late. Guns swung wildly, trying to find a target that had already escaped the moment. The destroyer began to list. Water poured into compartments designed never to flood. Damage control teams rushed forward, sealing doors, pumping frantically, fighting the sea itself. Training took over, but training could not undo physics. The small boat was already gone, swallowed by darkness and distance, its mission complete. It had not stayed to watch. Survival demanded disappearance. On the destroyer, confusion turned into fear. Speed dropped, power failed in sections. Officers struggled to understand how such damage had occurred so quickly. Reports conflicted, systems malfunctioned. Steel that once felt invincible now felt fragile. This was no longer a battle. It was a realization. The Japanese crew understood they had not been defeated by superior firepower. They had been defeated by assumption, by the belief that only big threats mattered, by the arrogance of thinking nothing small could kill something great. As water continued to rise, one truth became unavoidable. The sea does not care about rank, tonnage, or reputation. It only cares about balance, and that balance had shifted. By the time higher command realized what was happening, the damage was irreversible. A destroyer built to dominate the ocean was now fighting simply to stay afloat. And the men aboard understood something terrifying. If one small boat could do this, the war they thought they understood was already gone. It was the moment Japan's naval myth cracked. Quietly, but permanently. Steel had not been challenged by steel, but by imagination, patience, and nerve. And as the damaged ship drifted helplessly, the Pacific seemed to whisper a warning. The rules had changed, and only those who adapted would survive the darkness ahead. This night would echo forward, shaping every engagement to come, long after flames died and official reports tried to explain the impossible eventually everywhere. By dawn, the sea told the truth, before any report ever could. The Japanese destroyer did not sink immediately. It lingered, wounded, slowed, humiliated. Smoke drifted low over the water. mixing with steam from ruptured pipes below deck. Sailors stood at their stations, soaked, exhausted, staring at damage that made no sense. This ship was built to survive battles, to escort fleets, to hunt submarines, to dominate smaller enemies. Yet it had been crippled by something barely worth mentioning in naval briefings. That realization spread through the crew faster than fear. Damage control teams fought desperately. Pumps roared, bulkheads were sealed. Men worked knee-deep in freezing water, hands bleeding, lungs burning, refusing to believe this was how it ended. Officers barked orders with confidence they no longer felt. But the ocean kept winning. The list increased by degrees, slow enough to feel manageable, fast enough to terrify. Every correction failed to hold. Power flickered. Radios crackled with broken messages requesting assistance, trying to sound calm, trying to sound in control. Higher command received the transmission and hesitated. A destroyer? Damaged by a small boat? The first assumption was mechanical failure. The second was exaggeration. The third, never spoken aloud, was disbelief. Because accepting the truth meant accepting something far worse. It meant Japan's naval doctrine was outdated. For years, Japanese strategy rested on decisive surface engagements. Fleet actions, honor, tonnage, firepower. Small craft were tools, not threats, nuisances, not killers. But now, doctrine collided with reality. A tiny silhouette, a precise strike, a catastrophic outcome. As escort vessels approached to assist, commanders studied the damaged ship and asked a quiet question no one wanted to answer. How many more small boats were out there? The destroyer was eventually abandoned. Not in chaos, not in panic, but in silence. Sailors climbed down ropes into the sea, watching their ship, once a symbol of imperial strength, lean helplessly like a wounded animal. Some wept. Others stared blankly. Many felt something worse than fear. Betrayal. They had trusted steel, trusted speed, trusted reputation, and all of it had failed them. The psychological impact reached far beyond the wreck itself. Across the fleet, captains began issuing new orders. Increased night vigilance. Weapons manned even against insignificant contacts. Searchlights sweeping constantly. Gunners tense, fingers close to triggers. Attention brings mistakes. Crews fired at shadows. Fuel consumption skyrocketed. Fatigue set in. Confidence eroded. Every wave now looked like a threat. Every ripple felt like an ambush. The ocean had turned hostile. Not because it had changed, but because the illusion of control was gone. Enemy forces understood this perfectly. They didn't need to destroy every ship. They only needed to make every ship afraid. Small boats multiplied, hit-and-run tactics spread. Harbors were no longer safe. Night was no longer a shield, it was a weapon. The Japanese Navy, once proud and aggressive, began reacting instead of commanding. Resources diverted to defense instead of offense. Escorts pulled from missions to protect against threats that barely registered months earlier. This is how empires bleed, not from a single fatal blow, but from thousands of cuts that drain confidence, energy, and momentum. Strategists in Tokyo reviewed the incident repeatedly. They tried to rationalize it as an anomaly, a rare success, an unlucky alignment of circumstances. But deep down, they knew better. Technology had shifted, warfare had shifted, and Japan was chasing a future that had already arrived without permission. The lesson was brutal but clear. When power grows too large, it becomes predictable. When weapons grow too heavy, they become slow. When doctrine becomes tradition, it becomes vulnerable. The destroyer had not been defeated by firepower. It had been defeated by thinking small threats did not matter. And, as the wreck disappeared beneath the waves, it carried something more valuable than steel with it. It carried certainty. From that moment on, every Japanese captain understood. No ship was untouchable. No night was safe. No enemy was insignificant. The war at sea was no longer about who had the biggest guns. It was about who understood the new rules first. And Japan had just learned them the hard way. They had trusted steel, trusted speed, trusted reputation, and all of it had failed them. The psychological impact reached far beyond the wreck itself. Across the fleet, captains began issuing new orders, increased night vigilance, weapons manned even against insignificant contacts, searchlights sweeping constantly, gunners tense, fingers close to triggers. Attention brings mistakes. Crews fired at shadows. Fuel consumption skyrocketed. Fatigue set in. Confidence eroded. Every wave now looked like a threat. Every ripple felt like an ambush. The ocean had turned hostile, not because it had changed, but because the illusion of control was gone. Enemy forces understood this perfectly. They didn't need to destroy every ship. They only needed to make every ship afraid. Small boats multiplied, hit-and-run tactics spread. Harbors were no longer safe. Night was no longer a shield, it was a weapon. The Japanese Navy, once proud and aggressive, began reacting instead of commanding. Resources diverted to defense instead of offense. Escorts pulled from missions to protect against threats that barely registered months earlier. This is how empires bleed, not from a single fatal blow, but from thousands of cuts that drain confidence, energy, and momentum. Strategists in Tokyo reviewed the incident repeatedly. They tried to rationalize it as an anomaly, a rare success, an unlucky alignment of circumstances. But deep down, they knew better. Technology had shifted, warfare had shifted, and Japan was chasing a future that had already arrived without permission. The lesson was brutal but clear. When power grows too large, it becomes predictable. When weapons grow too heavy, they become slow. When doctrine becomes tradition, it becomes vulnerable. The destroyer had not been defeated by firepower. It had been defeated by thinking small threats did not matter. And, as the wreck disappeared beneath the waves, it carried something more valuable than steel with it. It carried certainty. From that moment on, every Japanese captain understood. No ship was untouchable. No night was safe. No enemy was insignificant. The war at sea was no longer about who had the biggest guns. It was about who understood the new rules first. And Japan had just learned them the hard way. The wreck sank quietly. No explosion. No final roar of engines. Just steel slipping beneath the surface, swallowed by dark water as if the ocean itself was erasing the evidence. By sunrise, nothing remained but scattered debris and oil spreading like a stain across the sea. But the real damage wasn't on the ocean floor. It was inside the minds of every naval commander who heard what had happened. Because this was not supposed to be possible. A Japanese destroyer represented years of engineering, doctrine, and pride. It was speed, armor, firepower, combined into a single symbol of imperial dominance. Naval planners had built strategies around ships like this. Entire campaigns assumed their superiority. And yet, one tiny boat had rewritten those assumptions in minutes. In the days that followed, the Japanese Navy conducted internal reviews. Reports were sanitized, language softened. The incident was framed as unusual circumstances or exceptional enemy luck. But among officers, the truth spread anyway. Whispered in corridors, shared quietly in wardrooms, passed between captains who no longer slept easily. If this could happen once, it could happen again. Destroyers began traveling differently, zigzagging more, slowing down at night, burning more fuel to stay alert. Lookouts were doubled. Crews were kept at higher readiness for longer hours. But readiness has a cost. Fatigue rose, mistakes increased, morale thinned. The very precautions meant to restore control only highlighted how fragile that control had become. Meanwhile, the enemy understood something Japan was still struggling to accept. Modern naval warfare was no longer about size. It was about timing, surprise, and exploiting assumptions. Small boats didn't need to win battles. They only needed to create doubt. Every Japanese ship now sailed under an invisible pressure, an unspoken question hanging over the deck. What if tonight is our turn? This fear reshaped engagements across the theater. Aggressive maneuvers became cautious. Bold plans were delayed. Opportunities were missed because commanders hesitated, scanning darkness for threats that might not even be there. And that hesitation mattered. War rewards momentum, punishes doubt, and devours those who react instead of act. Years later, naval historians would point to this period as a turning point, not because of tonnage lost, but because of confidence shattered. The destroyer's sinking proved a terrifying lesson. Technology does not guarantee dominance. Doctrine does not guarantee safety. And power, when misunderstood, can become a weakness. Steel had lost to imagination. Size had lost to speed. Certainty had lost to adaptability. The Japanese Navy never fully recovered its earlier sense of invincibility. Even as new ships were launched, the shadow of that night followed them. Officers trained harder, but trusted less. Crews obeyed orders, but wondered silently if those orders still applied to a changing war. And in the end, that doubt, quiet, constant, corrosive, did more damage than any torpedo. Because wars are not won only by weapons. They are won by understanding the moment when the rules change. That night, on dark water, with a tiny boat facing a steel giant, the rules changed. And Japan learned too late that no ship is too big to fall when it underestimates the smallest enemy.